Hello, my name is TAL and the title of my presentation is Art, Gender and Ageism, Feminist Intersectional Analysis of Old Age in Israel. Artist Aya Nitzan photographs her mother, Hedva, wearing professional glasses of the type used by Olympic sharpshooters. The old woman's gaze is direct and piercing. The artist tells of this work, and I quote, "She's wearing the glasses of a man, a young man, and they are adjusted for his eyes, not hers. It causes a disruption of her vision. She's unable to see clearly." End of quote. The focal point of this work is the notion of the gaze. What power does the gaze have and what does it produce? Who has the control over the scopic field? What does one look at and what is not seen? What kind of gaze does the old woman have now? Does she see things differently than before? Does she now have more or less control? The issue of the gaze is essential with respect to old age and the visibility of old women. It raises questions about how old women see themselves and how they are seen. Aya Nitzan, as well as an ever-growing number of additional women artists in Israel, develop a meta-reflection on the notion of the gaze in relation to gender and old age. Old women belong to two excluded social groups, women and the elderly. Thus, they are marginalized to even further territory than that of old men who are also marginalized in society. Intersectional analysis is particularly important to the feminist visual study of age and ageism. The term intersectionality was coined by Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989, who demonstrated the ways in which the overlap of sexism and racism against Black women created a dimension that had to be addressed and considered jointly. Since Cranshaw's seminal text, the list of categories that contribute to inequality or oppression has been expanded, and today it comes to include also class, sexual orientation, religion, physical ability, as well as age and additional categories. An analysis that juxtaposes social groups in relation to one another allows for a deeper understanding of the power relations working within society. Ageist incidents occur in almost every realm. Ageism is well entrenched in culture, and culture is what trains people to be ageist. The beginning of major changes in the way in which old women are represented in the arts, the growing number and the range of ways in which they are depicted, is most evident since the second half of the 20th century, especially among feminist artists from around the world. In the early years of Israeli art history, usually counted to 1906 at the founding of the Bezalel Academy in Jerusalem, very few works of art depict old women. Of those that did, two types can be differentiated. One portrays indigenous old women seen through an Orientalist and colonialist gaze, and the other portrays privileged and well-known old women documented thanks to their high social standing that they used to hold. But in the last 2 decades in Israel, more depictions of old women are created and they are more sensitive to issues of diversity. In Israel, a young nation state established in 1948, several social issues carry special significance for the elderly. Three elements give distinctive shape and influence to the notions about the elderly and their actual lives. The centrality of the ethos of the Sabre, that of the young male pioneer Sabre, the Holocaust of the Jews in World War II, and the fact that Israel has a religion-based immigration policy. Each of those individually and all three combined create unique circumstances for old people in Israel and influence their lives in very particular ways. The painting by Anna Lukashevsky encapsulates the ongoing experience of immigration, which in many senses never comes to an end. The picture portrays an old woman seated in a train, wearing a headscarf and a wide blue dress, trying to catch a nap during the journey. Luca Shepzi captures the situation in which a migrant woman is located in the traveling universe of the train. The choice to depict the woman within a vehicle of transport, which serves as a distinctive means of migration for many, reflects the isolation and wandering of the migrant subject. The uprooted old woman continues to wonder as through the window, a palm tree can be seen, symbol of the Mediterranean, the Levantine landscape that is present outside. Migration, an act that always undermines foundation, is experienced more profoundly by the elderly. This old woman, according to the artist herself, is a newcomer arriving in Israel in the year 2000, feeling disassociated and uprooted. This is why she's depicted in a silent despair, asleep without rest. In War Medals, Anya Kopyakov has photographed a woman named Raisa Vasilova and reveals the story behind the image, and I quote her words. The medals relate to migration and old age. It concerns many old women from the former Soviet Union. Although the woman seems to appear heroic and highly decorated, she is now 83 years old and her health has deteriorated. She can barely see. She lives in the south of Israel for a minimum pension that does not cover her needs. Without a husband who died long ago, she has no children. In a case like this, one can see the paradox of the glam, the glorious past of this woman in contrast to her harsh reality today. End of quote. Such women who arrive in Israel later in life face a bleak old age. They did not bring capital into the country and they do not have time to accumulate sufficient pension savings because their short work life in Israel and often because of having worked precarious jobs. The artist also makes note of additional difficulties confronting the elderly immigrants from the former Soviet Union, such as cultural isolation. These findings are true for any group of immigrants, but it is especially true for immigrants from the former Soviet Union and Ethiopia arriving in Israel since 1990. Being an old woman of color in Israel has a deep effect as the hegemony is white in essence. Within Israeli society, hypersensitive of the very word race because of the race rules of the Third Reich, right? It could be characterized as being racist without race or neo-racism. Etienne Baliber coined the term neo-racism to describe the elusive phenomenon in which racist ideologies are rationalized using cultural tools. Racism of this type does not have to explicitly use the category race and is based on cultural differences between social groups, as Sofia Jambar shows. For old women, racial belonging frequently creates system of a double or triple discrimination based on gender, age, and race. Many Ethiopian women report that the loneliness in old age is felt more poignantly in Israel because of the different way of life in the new country. Most Jews in Ethiopia lived in rural area at ground level, and old people who wanted company only had to leave the huts. Upon arrival in Israel, many live in public housing, high risers, and going out is no longer so simple. Hence, the isolation and loneliness have become problematic indeed. Also, Jewish women from Muslim countries, North Africa, and various countries in the Middle East are women of culture, of color, of course, and they too suffer oppression and marginalization in Israel, which is dominated by decades of Ashkenazi hegemony. Ashkenazi are Jews from European origin. Taking inspiration from her family picture album, Shula Keshet depicts her grandmother, a strong, proud old lady standing with traditional head cover against a beautiful Persian carpet. The old woman, an immigrant from Mashhad, Iran, stands as a proud example of matriarchal line. Without assistance from their Western feminist counterparts, who often attempt to save these women and advance them to the Western modern conducts, this woman is portrayed by Keshet as a subject with agency. By foregrounding a representation that expresses her subjectivity and agency, Keshet renews the image of Mizrahi old women who are usually excluded from Israeli hegemonic art scene or presented in bias or derogative manners. Samira Wahabe photographed an old woman sitting in an olive grove that has been in the family for generations. The woman photographed symbolizes the connection to tradition, to the past, to the land, to the place. For Wahebe, the old woman and other women are those that transmit to the coming generations the foundation on which all of society rests. Arab comprise 20% of the population of Israel. Old Arab women belong to three oppressed minority groups: old age, female gender, and Arab nationality. In the transition of Arab society from a traditional agrarian to a modern industrialized society, these changes cause a decrease in the activity of the social network that supports the elderly in that community. Amira Zian photographs her mother wearing a niqab, a large white headscarf of religious Druze women. The artist says, and I quote her words, "My mother is one of the strongest women I've ever seen. She worked a lot in her life. She had many difficulties, and she was always strong and never gave up. Even though she and I have different views in life, I still take from her the strength to stand tall in life." End of quote. Palestinian artist Noel Jabour, a Christian from Nazareth, photographed Unyad, a labor worker from Nablus, sitting on the ground in a field where she is working. The photo reflects the connection to Palestinian Arabs and their connection to the land, a connection that the generation of old women who experienced the Nakba personally feel in an especially strong manner. Against the background of national conflict within Israel between Israeli and Palestinians, the point of view of elderly women is particularly interesting and important. The old Palestinian is an agent of collective memory, a witness that can pass a report from first hand. This image of the old Palestinian woman who experienced the Nakba and the Naksa that shaped national consciousness is distinctive to the Palestinian people. In the early 1990s, Alisa Averbuch began to photograph 90 and 100-year-old people who founded kibbutzim and moshavim. Through them, she encountered a unique generations of Jews who founded the State of Israel. When the men and women pioneers began to build the Jewish settlements in Palestine back in the 19th century, they were a unigenerational society of young people. The kibbutzim pioneers who were photographed by Averbuch described to her their amazement that they had become old. "We never thought we would grow old," said one woman to the artist she was photographing. During the founding years of the State of Israel, the proportion of old people in the population was very, very low. The marginality of the image of the old person is closely related to the Zionist ethos, which rejected the image of the old diaspora Jew. Anti-Semitic Europe presented the Jew as an old man or woman, while the Zionist ethos preferred the image of the Sabre, the new Jew, who is a rebel, powerful, energetic, and primarily young. It seemed that among Jews, and certainly in comparison with Arabs, a generational link of the elderly was missing. Initially because of the pioneers, the young pioneers, and later also because of the Holocaust. The photographic trilogy by Alisa Averbach, Pioneers, then the Immigrants, and finally the series titled Survivors of the Holocaust, is distinctive types of old women, very typical of Israeliness. The work by Rachel Nemes places the experience of the Holocaust on the continuum between being pushed to speak and being silenced about that terrible period in the lives of millions of Jews during the Second World War. At old age, when the time comes to sum up life, a formative and often paralyzing experience like the Holocaust is called into attention and indeed is treated by several contemporary artists today in Israel. Aviva Kaplan, who researched life of elderly in Israel in old age homes, presented insightful information about how the memory of the Holocaust is experienced among old survivors. Her finding revealed that for the residents of the facility that she has studied, the Holocaust was outside the social consensus, something not to be talked about at all. This is also the case in private household of many families of survivors till this very day. In Nemesh's work, we see the old woman, which the daughter has painted, with the number that the Nazi have burned onto her skin, yes, on the arm, her palm covering her eyes and forehead, sentencing herself to keep the memories within, carrying the burden in silence. Conclusion. The aging body is ostensibly personal and private, but it is political and public at the same time because the social norms from which it deviates. In the best phenomenological tradition, as Simone de Beauvoir wrote in her book, The Second Sex, I quote, the body is not a thing, it is a situation. It is our grasp on the world and the outline for all our projects. End of quote. From the rich diversity of old age presented in this talk, one can conclude that ageism is the polar opposite of aging. While ageism is characterized by absolute monolicity, old age is beaming with variety, diversity, and individuality. Margaret Gillette has formulated this well when stating in her research, I quote, in nothing do people differ more than in their aging. In nothing are they more homogenized than by their ageism. In that respect, art holds an important role as feminist anti-ageist art can take active part in raising awareness and pushing forward positive public opinion and contributing to, in substantial ways to actual social change. Thank you very much.